Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world where everyone wants to be seen. Everyone's talking, tweeting, snapping, posting. But let me tell you something powerful. The weak version of you is not who you truly are. It is the accumulation of fears you accepted, excuses you repeated, and limitations you believed. It is not your identity, but your history, your past mindset wrapped in comfort and hesitation. That version exists because at some point it was easier to comply than to conquer. You learn to survive, not to thrive. But the survival version of you cannot lead a life of greatness. You cannot rise while carrying the weight of indecision, procrastination, and mental laziness. Every time you delay, every time you hesitate, that weak version gets stronger. It speaks through your inner dialogue, telling you you're not ready, not smart enough, not connected enough, not educated enough. But those are not truths. They're repeated lies dressed up as logic. There must come a moment when you stop negotiating with the lower version of yourself. You cannot keep giving space to something that was only meant to be temporary. Fear-based identities have expiration dates, but they will rot your purpose if you keep refrigerating them with justification. That version of you wants to be liked more than respected, accepted more than impactful, and comfortable, but impact and comfort do not live in the same house. You cannot demand influence while still trying to be invisible. You cannot step into divine assignment while still hiding behind man-made excuses. The weak version of you is fluent in the language of distraction. It knows how to make you busy but not productive. It knows how to wear you out without ever making real progress. It wants you to chase instead of create, wish instead of build, react instead of lead. The goal of that version is to keep you tired, uncertain, and broke in your wallet, in your mindset, in your relationships, and in your spiritual life. Rebuilding requires demolition. You don't paint over broken walls, you tear them down and lay a new foundation. You don't keep patching the old version, you release it. Let it die. Let the addiction to mediocrity burn off. Let the desire to be liked fall away. Let the validation you once needed no longer hold power. Because true rebuilding starts when you're willing to be misunderstood for a season in order to be unshakable for a lifetime. You must become a builder, not just a dreamer. A builder counts the cost, gets clear on the blueprint, and begins to execute without emotional permission. The strong version of you is already inside, waiting for you to stop feeding the counterfeit one. This new version isn't based on hype, emotion, or trends. It is based on timeless truth. It's built on vision, discipline, and alignment. You stop outsourcing your decisions to your feelings and you start acting based on your future. The weak version of you made decisions based on the moment. The strong version of you makes decisions based on the mission. You stop starting over and start building on what works. You stop comparing and start creating. You stop looking for a miracle and realize you are already a miracle in motion. That kind of clarity doesn't come from hype. It comes from death. The death of the false you, the scared you, the silent you, the distracted you. And that death must be intentional. It doesn't happen naturally. It happens when you draw a line and decide that the next chapter of your life cannot be authored by your old character traits. It happens when you elevate your standards, your circle, your routine, your beliefs, and your words. The rebuilt version of you speaks differently. It no longer says, I hope, it says, I will. It no longer wonders what if, it declares what's next. Rebuilding yourself begins with facing the reality that who you have been is not the final version of who you are supposed to become. Most people want change, but they resist the internal confrontation that precedes transformation. They want new outcomes without new mindsets, fresh results without cutting off the old roots. But if you are truly going to kill the weak version of yourself, it requires a total shift in how you see identity, time, pain, purpose, and discipline. That weak version of you is comfortable because it's familiar. It knows how to operate within boundaries that don't stretch you. It has memorized your insecurities, rehearsed your failures, and recycled your doubts into daily thinking. It masquerades as your personality, but it's really just a script written by fear, replayed through inaction, and performed in silence. When you start the rebuilding process, you begin by examining your agreements. What did you agree to believe about yourself that isn't true? What voices did you give authority in your life that had no business shaping your identity? Weakness grows when you come into agreement with lies that shrink your vision and limit your faith. Rebuilding starts with breaking those agreements and writing new ones based on truth, not feelings, not circumstances, truth. And the truth is you were created with capacity, not average, not confusion, capacity. The capacity to grow, the capacity to lead, the capacity to earn, the capacity to influence. But capacity without construction is wasted potential. That's why your environment matters. You cannot rebuild yourself in the same environment that broke you. You must change what you listen to, who you speak to, and where you spend your energy. Every atmosphere is shaping you, even when you're unaware of it. Too often people try to rebuild with the same emotional tools that failed them. They use guilt as motivation. They use shame as fuel. They use pressure as a substitute for purpose. But you were never meant to be rebuilt by broken tools. You must choose to be rebuilt by principles like consistency over intensity, vision over feelings, integrity over convenience. It's not glamorous, but it works. You stop needing emotional highs to do the work and start building your life brick by brick, day by day, step by step. The weak version of you wanted miracles without movement, but the real, powerful you understands that movement is the miracle. Every disciplined action becomes a brick in the structure of your future self. You don't have to feel powerful to build powerfully. You just have to keep building. Rebuilding also requires forgiveness, not just for others, but for yourself. Because that weak version of you made mistakes. That version made wrong choices. That version wasted time. But you cannot rebuild a future while resenting your past. You must redeem your past by using its lessons as your new materials. Regret cannot be your architect. Wisdom must be. Every failure becomes instruction. Every delay becomes data. Every loss becomes leverage. That's the mindset of someone who has killed the weak version of themselves and is committed to rebuilding from a place of power. You must also master your language. The way you speak shapes the way you build. Stop rehearsing what didn't work. Stop calling yourself by your struggle. Start declaring your identity based on truth and vision. Words create environments. Speak like the version of you who already knows where they're going, not the one who's afraid to leave where they've been. Speak strategy. Speak faith. Speak forward. That's how rebuilding begins. You don't wait for motivation. You use clarity and truth as your cement. You pour it with discipline. You shape it with standards. You protect it with boundaries, and you defend it with faith. Not the passive kind that waits for signs, but the active kind that moves while others hesitate. The strong version of you is not louder, it's clearer. It's not always seen, but it's always consistent. And every day you choose that version, you silence the weaker one permanently. Every person is living in one of two versions of themselves: the constructed version or the compromised version. The constructed version is built through conscious choice, strategy, and submission to purpose. The compromised version is built through delay, emotional reactions, and fear-based decisions. Most people live as a compromise. They adjust their dreams to match their doubts. They shrink their potential to match their pain. But you were not designed to live in compromise. You were created to be constructed intentionally, intelligently, and with clarity. And that construction doesn't happen on accident. It happens when you take radical ownership of your development. Not when it's convenient, but especially when it's not. Because real growth doesn't begin with action, it begins with identity. Until you see yourself differently, you'll sabotage what you build. You'll keep returning to habits that fit the old you. You'll keep second-guessing opportunities that were meant for the new you. The construction of your higher self begins when you stop running from the mirror. You have to be honest about your patterns. You have to acknowledge the ways you hide behind distractions and emotional indulgence. The weak version of you thrives on not being confronted. It wants silence. It wants you to scroll instead of think, to entertain instead of execute. But building requires confrontation. It requires looking at the areas where you've been casual and calling them what they are: destructive. You can't build with broken standards. You can't upgrade your life with a low opinion of yourself. And you definitely can't construct a strong future while tolerating emotional chaos. That's why emotional mastery is foundation. Because if you don't govern your emotions will govern your results. You'll keep starting over every time life gets uncomfortable. But growth doesn't show up when life gets easy. It shows up when you stop quitting under pressure. When you kill the weak version of yourself, you don't just eliminate behaviors, you change blueprints. You stop copying patterns that never served you. You stop emulating people who have no fruit. You stop chasing validation and start aligning with vision. Every builder needs a blueprint. And your blueprint must be rooted in principles, not feelings. That means you prioritize clarity over confusion, excellence over ease, results over reactions. You measure progress by execution, not excitement. The weak version of you wants applause. The real version of you wants alignment. The weak version wants to be seen. The real version wants to be solid. You build by becoming solid, consistent, focused, disciplined, unshakable. That doesn't mean you won't have challenges. It means challenges no longer control you. Emotions don't dictate your standards. Circumstances don't alter your principles. And setbacks don't erase your strategies. Reconstruction also means redefinition. You must redefine success, redefine failure, redefine identity. Most people fail because they've defined success as comfort and failure as discomfort. So the moment the process gets hard, they believe something is wrong. But construction is messy. It requires demolition. It requires patience. It requires dirt under your nails and sweat on your forehead. There is no easy way to build a life of purpose. There is only a focused way. There is only a clear way. There is only a disciplined way. That's why the blueprint matters. You don't just build based on what feels good. You build based on what is good. And you measure everything against your assignment, not your emotions. Because what's at stake is too valuable to leave to chance. Your future, your influence, your legacy. It all depends on whether you will keep building or keep bending. You also have to reinforce what you build. Many people build momentum but don't protect it. They get traction, then drift. They get clarity, then compromise. But builders don't just start projects, they finish them. They don't just declare goals, they execute them. They protect the process. That's how you know the weak version is dead. When consistency replaces crisis management. When strategy replaces scrambling. When direction replaces doubt. You stop performing and start producing. You stop hesitating and start executing. And you stop chasing feelings and start choosing principles. The weak version of you is always searching for shortcuts because it doesn't believe in the process. It wants results without refinement, rewards without responsibility, and freedom without discipline. But that mindset is rooted in deception. Growth is not about speed, it's about stability. The weak version of you is unstable, easily distracted, emotionally reactive, and spiritually disconnected. It is driven by temporary highs instead of timeless truths. It seeks motivation from the outside rather than alignment from within. And as long as that version of you is alive, your potential is imprisoned. You cannot reach a destiny you are unwilling to develop. The person you were created to be is already in you, but the conditions to bring that person forward are created through pressure, decision, obedience, and consistent action. The rebuilding process is not glamorous. It's not supposed to be. That's why most people avoid it. They want transformation to look like a celebration, when in reality, it looks like isolation, repetition, silence, and sacrifice. The weak version of you cannot survive that environment. It needs noise, applause, validation, and distraction. But the version of you that is Powerful, strategic, impactful, and free, that version is only activated in the fire. Not the fire that destroys, but the fire that refines. The fire of uncomfortable decisions. The fire of accountability. The fire of integrity when no one is watching. It's not about how loud you are. The weak version of you changes based on who's in the room. The strong version of you remains consistent, whether seen or unseen, whether supported or rejected. When you kill the weak version of yourself, you are choosing to die to the appetite of mediocrity. You stop feeding distractions. You stop negotiating with laziness. You stop allowing your old language, your old habits, and your old circle to keep you average. You can't keep entertaining weak energy and expect to walk in strong purpose. You are responsible for your atmosphere. You are responsible for your standards. You are responsible for your direction. No one is coming to do it for you. And that's not something to fear. It's something to embrace. Because once you realize that the same power that built empires, that overcame adversity, that changed legacies, is already living inside of you, your only task is to remove what's blocking it. That's why alignment is more powerful than ambition. The weak version of you may be ambitious, but it's often out of alignment. It wants elevation without foundation. But true growth starts when your desires, your actions, and your environment all agree with your purpose. You can't pray for purpose and then live out a pattern. You can't speak abundance and walk in scarcity. You can't declare transformation while clinging to dysfunction. Alignment means your thoughts, your schedule, your habits, your relationships, and your resources all point in one direction. That kind of alignment doesn't happen by accident. It happens through aggressive clarity. You must decide who you are, what you're called to, and what no longer belongs in your life. The weak version of you wants to be everything to everyone. The strong version of you is selective, intentional, focused. It doesn't apologize for being unavailable to things that don't serve the mission. It doesn't compromise to avoid discomfort. It doesn't need to prove itself. Because when you rebuild yourself correctly, your life becomes the proof. You don't have to convince anyone of your worth. Your fruit will speak for itself. But fruit is only produced when the root is strong. So this process is not about performance, it's about planting. Every decision, every discipline, every moment of silence where you choose prayer over panic, clarity over chaos, and building over blaming, those moments are planting seeds for the life you were created to live. You cannot skip this part. You cannot outsource the building. You must do the work. You must stay the course. You must die to the version of yourself that is addicted to quitting and resurrect the version that is committed to finishing. That's the only way real transformation happens. Not through hype, but through habits. Not through emotion, but through execution. Not through fantasy, but through faith that is proven by what you do daily. The weak version of you was built by default, not design. It formed over time through repetition of low standards, acceptance of average outcomes, and tolerance of excuses that felt reasonable but were actually deadly. That version was allowed to grow because it was never challenged, never held accountable, never forced to stand in the mirror and answer hard questions. It became familiar, even comfortable. But familiarity is not freedom. It is a trap disguised as security. You cannot elevate your life by protecting the personality that keeps you bound. The process of rebuilding yourself begins with recognizing that your identity is not a fixed point. It's a decision that must be reinforced daily through thought, action, and alignment with purpose. You must understand that the life you're living right now is a direct reflection of the standards you've accepted. The weak version of you settles for what is available, while the strong version of you demands what is aligned. That difference is everything. Weakness doesn't always show up as failure. Sometimes it shows up as settling for good when great was possible. It shows up as saying yes to things that drain you because you haven't trained yourself to say no with clarity. It shows up in the form of busyness that produces no progress. Rebuilding is about interrupting those patterns and replacing them with structure that is driven by vision, structure that protects your energy, structure that trains your mind to obey your mission, not your moods. Killing the weak version of you is not about shame. It's about strategy. It's not about rejecting who you've been, but surrendering that version so the real you can emerge. That means you need to evaluate what you've built your identity on. Is it pain? Is it performance? Is it approval? Or is it purpose? When your identity is built on anything temporary, you become emotionally fragile and spiritually unstable. The weak version of you reacts to everything. The strong version of you responds with intention. That shift alone can change your life. Because emotional stability is not a personality trait, it is a discipline. And discipline is the difference between repeating your past or rewriting your future. The foundation of rebuilding is always belief, not blind belief, but directed belief. Belief backed by movement. Belief rooted in truth. Belief that says, I don't need to feel ready to be responsible. The weak version of you waits for the right moment. The strong version of you creates momentum through obedience and discipline. You cannot build a future while waiting for perfect conditions. Conditions don't create success, conviction does. Conviction leads to clarity. Clarity leads to focus. Focus leads to progress. And progress reinforces the new identity. Every time you show up with intention, you are teaching your body, your brain, and your spirit who you really are. You are unlearning the lies of limitation and rebuilding a foundation based on action, authority, and alignment. Environment plays a crucial role in this process. You cannot become strong in a setting designed for your comfort. You need environments that challenge your assumptions, expose your blind spots, and demand your best. The weak version of you fears those spaces. It prefers affirmation over accuracy. But the strong version of you understands that correction is not rejection, it's preparation. The people around you matter, the words you speak matter, the content you consume matters. Everything you expose yourself to is either reinforcing the old you or cultivating the new you. That's why awareness is not optional. Awareness leads to intentionality, and intentionality is the key to transformation. Rebuilding yourself means choosing to become someone who does not need hype to move, someone who does not wait to be pushed but is driven by vision, someone who is willing to be misunderstood for a season in order to walk in power for a lifetime. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. You are not rebuilding from scratch. You are rebuilding from experience, from insight, from clarity, from revelation. Every mistake taught you something. Every delay developed something. And now you are called to use all of it, not just for survival, but for significance. The weak version of you is always driven by impulse. It is reactive, short-sighted, easily influenced by emotion, and rarely aligned with long-term vision. It chooses convenience over conviction, noise over clarity, and survival over strategy. It is not the real you. It is simply the untrained version of you. You are not designed to live by default. You are designed to live by intention. The process of rebuilding begins when you stop asking what feels right and start asking what aligns with your future. The truth is, you don't need more inspiration, you need more instruction. You need to train your mind the same way an athlete trains for competition. You need to teach your body to obey the mission instead of reacting to the moment. You need to build routines that align with the results you say you want. There comes a point where you must become the architect of your own identity, not based on who you were or even who people think you are, but on who you are called to be. That version of you cannot be built through opinion. It must be built through obedience to purpose. Purpose does not submit to pressure. Purpose requires pressure. The weak version of you runs from resistance. The strong version of you uses resistance as fuel. You must decide whether pressure will become your prison or your platform. The only way to build a life of significance is to train yourself to lead under pressure, execute through doubt, and move without applause. That level of discipline doesn't come naturally. It comes from death to comfort. The comfort you crave is often the very thing sabotaging your calling. Comfort tells you to rest before you've earned it. Comfort tells you to delay what must be done now. Comfort tells you to stay in relationships that no longer match your assignment. The weak version of you has made too many decisions based on comfort, and now you're being called to rise. That calling won't wait for your emotions to catch up. It will demand that you grow up, stand up, and build from a place of conviction. Conviction will carry you when motivation disappears. Conviction will drive you when the room is silent. Conviction will separate you from the noise and position you for clarity. That is the space where transformation lives. You cannot rebuild yourself with words alone. You must use action as your proof. Every choice you make is either casting a vote for your future or your past. You can no longer afford to be double-minded. The weak version of you had too many open doors, too many options, too many compromises. The new version of you must be built with precision. That means saying no to distractions. That means protecting your energy. That means owning your calendar, your focus, and your decisions. That means refusing to explain your standards to people who don't carry your vision. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your discipline. You owe yourself the commitment to honor your own calling. The strong version of you is not louder, it is clearer. It is not seeking to be seen, it is seeking to make impact. And that kind of impact begins in silence. In the hours where no one is watching, no one is clapping, and no one is affirming. The rebuilt version of you knows how to dominate in the dark. It knows how to pray when frustrated, build when tired, and stay focused when tempted. That is not accidental behavior. It is trained behavior. You must train your response, train your habits, train your thinking. You must train your environment to match your identity. That training becomes your strength. It is the evidence that the old version of you has been replaced by something greater, something sharper, something built to last. You are not rebuilding for applause. You are rebuilding for assignment. That means your results are not about impressing people, they're about impacting generations. Your transformation is not cosmetic, it is foundational. It is not about looking better, it is about becoming stronger. That strength is not found in intensity, it is found in consistency. The weak version of you needed reminders. The strong version of you creates results, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Not because it's popular, but because it's obedient. Not because it feels good, but because it's who you really are underneath the layers you're finally willing to let go of. The greatest battle you will ever fight is not with the world. It's with the version of you that was never meant to survive. That weak version, built on fear, excuses, distractions, and comfort, has ruled long enough. But now you stand at the crossroads of identity and destiny. You don't need more time, you need a decision. The decision to stop negotiating with mediocrity. The decision to stop living in patterns that no longer serve your purpose. The decision to bury the old and build the new with intention, clarity, and discipline. You were never called to play small, settle, or stay silent. You were called to multiply, to lead, to create impact that outlives you. Rebuilding yourself isn't a suggestion, it's a mandate. And the moment you kill the weaker version of you is the moment your real life begins. Not a life of survival, but one of strategy. Not a life of reaction, but one of radical responsibility. Because when you step into the version of you that was designed by purpose and forged by faith, you won't just change your life, you'll change the lives of everyone connected to your obedience.